take a look. So welcome to this information session on our new Operate Sustain program. It's really exciting to be able to release this program in January and hand it over to you. I wanted to introduce myself. I am Brini Karras. I'm the Director of Arts Nova Scotia, and this is my colleague Lauren Williams, who is the Program Officer for the Operate programs. Before we start the session, I'd like to acknowledge that we are gathered across Mi'kma'ki, the unceded and unsurrendered traditional territory of the Mi'kmaq people. Arts Nova Scotia honors the treaties of peace and friendship, and we aim to use them as a guide for our actions and our interactions with the land and with the people of this land. One of our most recent actions was to develop and implement an equity framework for Arts Nova Scotia. This framework not only informs assessment criteria, but it can be used to prioritize funding organizations that are led by members of designated priority groups. If you would like more information on this equity framework, you can find it on our website. There's several links in different places. I'm just going to give you a little bit of an agenda for this afternoon. So obviously do the welcome introductions, and I'll give you a slight orientation just before we go through some of the guidelines and application overview. I think Lauren's just going to take us really right through some of the material on the website, just as our best way to sort of make really clear about where to find all the information. And then if there's, of course, any questions afterwards, we can answer them as best we can I think we have quite a bit of time allotted for Q&A. And then, of course, if you have specific questions around your organization that seem more suited to an individual one-on-one conversation, please know that you can always email us or arrange an appointment for a phone call or a Teams meeting. We're available, and also know that probably because there's some changes that people will have additional questions. So just a little bit about how we got to the point that we are right now with these programs. Arts Nova Scotia developed 2 new programs to provide operating funding to professional arts organizations. When funding for operating assistance was doubled in 2023, Arts Nova Scotia committed to reviewing the program to ensure it remained responsive to community needs and supported the long-term sustainability of the sector. So this review of the program considered learnings from the Building Back Better report, as well as Arts Nova Scotia's strategic priorities. In addition, we did a public feedback survey and 3 targeted facilitated group discussions that all took place in the fall of 2023. If you would like more information about any of those reports or priorities or the ShareBack document from the community, then we will post those links in the chat, or you can just find them on our website. In general, there was consensus that the operating assistance program structure did not allow for meaningful changes in funding levels for established organizations or the welcoming of new and emerging organizations. Organizations also felt that the process needed to be optimized for organization size and better aligned with other funders where possible. We also understand that sometimes there can be confusion as to whether to apply to Arts Nova Scotia or to the department through the Culture and Heritage Division. So I just wanted to note some of the big differences between the organizations that we support. These are just high-level differences. There's more detail on through each one of our programs. But Arts Nova Scotia in general supports organizations that create work by professional artists, produce work by professional artists, and present work by professional artists. And the Culture and Heritage Division supports organizations that produce cultural products, own and manage cultural facilities, provide services to the cultural sector, produce or present cultural festivals or events. In addition, if you're receiving operating support currently from the Culture and Heritage Division or have in the past, then you will continue to apply for to their program. Jessica Peddle, Program Officer for that program, has joined us on this call just so that she can say a quick hello and let you know where to find her. Hi, Jessica. Do you want to?
Hi, everyone. Sorry, I had to race into an office because I couldn't get my headphones to work. I did take a quick look at the participant list, so there are definitely some folks on there that have received funding through the CHD's operating assistance program. So we will be communicating out to folks very shortly with how we're proceeding with our 24-25 program. But as Brady said, I'm just sitting in on this one to hear what folks have to say and just to put a name to a face. Thanks.
Thanks, Jessica. So as mentioned before, we did develop 2 programs for the operating support to organizations, arts organizations. So before we dive into the details of Sustain, I just wanted to provide a high-level overview of both the programs. So Activate is designed for artist-driven organizations who may be emerging, working on a shorter term together, or with a smaller administrative capacity. It requires less reporting with a simplified application process. The minimum annual revenues is $40,000 in one of the last 3 years. Those are, again, just very high level criteria for that program. And I think Lauren just put in the chat there that the recording for the Activate information session that we held last week can be found on our website. And then for Sustain, it's designed for organizations with a proven history where strategic planning processes ensure that the organization's ability to navigate change, adapt to new circumstances, and they can also tolerate more risk. It's more aligned with the Canada Council for the Arts applications, and we are asking for reporting through Canadian Arts Database, which is also known as CADAC. There's an asterisk there because if you are not already registered with CADAC, we are not going to require you to do that this year. We know that there's a lot of work involved in getting registered with CADAC, and we will help support organizations in doing so. The median annual revenues for that will be for the minimum for being able to be eligible for this Sustain program is $100,000 over the past 4 years.
Thank you, Briony. As Briony mentioned, I'm really just going to go through the guidelines rather than put together, a slide deck with the same information that we have on our website. I'll really take you to the source and show you where you can go back and find things for yourselves later. But before we even jump into that, the big question that we often get is about this median revenue question. So for the purposes of the Sustain program, I'm going to walk you through a hypothetical median revenue situation. So you can do it for yourselves if you haven't done so already. So median revenue is calculated by taking the last 4 fiscal years that you've completed and arranging them from the lowest revenue to the highest revenue. So here's a hypothetical organization. They see a big dip in 2020 due to the pandemic. But what happens is to get the median, we take those middle 2 numbers of the ranking from lowest to highest, and we divide those in 2 to find the median revenue. So the reason why we use this is because it helps, account for some of those outlier years. For example, in this case, if we looked at average rather than median, they wouldn't qualify for this program. They would be at 91,250 for an average. So if anyone needs this, I have it in a Word doc. I can send it to you. But I do know that that is one of the most commonly answered questions. So to find the Sustain program and any other program at Arts Nova Scotia, artsns.ca, and then go to Sustain. The first thing that you see is March 15th is the application deadline for this program. So that means March 15th by 11:59 p.m. We were able to extend that from March 1st to March 15th just to give folks a little bit more time. You can see my face and my contact information. As Brittany said, if you have really specific questions about your organization or want someone to look at your application, I am absolutely available for that and can be reached over phone or email. At the top of the page are the form downloads. So these are all like sort of the meat of the application. So there are three Microsoft forms to fill out. The first is the application form. And one thing that I've noted is this is the first form that you see that you need, but it should probably be the last thing that you fill out. So you'll fill this out after you have all of your pieces put together for the application. You'll see it just opens up in another window, and you can fill all of this out. It's pretty basic information. We're not asking for any long form questions in there. If you are looking for a preview of these questions, you can find them in the application checklist. The application checklist is like your go-to document for applying to the program, and should like have everything that you need in there. The second form, which will open up, is a self-ID form for your organization. This is an optional document, but is what we use to both collect information about who is accessing our programs and who isn't, and as well helps us identify who fits within our equity framework as priority groups in this program. The third is the climate change questionnaire. We are asking everyone who applies to Sustain to fill this out. It is mandatory, but you are not being evaluated on this. We are just trying to get a sense of what are people's familiarity with the threat of climate change, what is their experience with it, and what are some of the things that you've seen, put into action or could be put into action. And this will sort of inform our future policies and research. There is a financial template. I'm not going to open it, but it opens up into an Excel spreadsheet. This is not required if you use CADAC. As we mentioned, if you're not on CADAC already and you're saying, what is CADAC? I've never heard of that before. No problem. You're going to use the financial template. In that financial template, this is a little different from other years and also folks who use CADAC. We are asking for your completed fiscal year, your most recently completed fiscal year numbers, your current fiscal year projections, and your next year in the funding cycle projections. We're not asking you to project out 4 years of financial projections, just the following year. And in between each reporting period, you will project out for the following year. There is also the programming template, which is an Excel spreadsheet. This is pretty identical to the Canada Council programming template. It's a little bit slimmed down and a little bit, I think, easier to fill out. If you don't already have a programming template through your Canada Council applications, you can use the form that we've provided. But if you have a programming template from Canada Council, you can reuse that, just making sure that it is up to date. Finally, I mentioned your application checklist is what's going to be really important for you in this process. I'm going to open it up, but we're going to go through it in detail at the end. So Brittany, of course, has already talked about sort of the purpose of this program. And we also just wanted to highlight that just because you are eligible for the Sustain program doesn't mean, like if you meet the eligibility criteria, it doesn't mean that you are required to apply to Sustain. You also are welcome to apply to the Activate program. And there's a lot of reasons why you might choose to do that. It's significantly less work for the application. That like frees up a lot of time for you. It also, as we'll talk through later, gives you more access to project funding. So at the beginning, we talked about our strategic priorities, so one of which is climate change, and that's why we're asking you to fill out the climate change questionnaire. But one of these strategic priorities that Arts Nova Scotia has set out is anti-oppression, and so Brini mentioned the equity framework. So in this program, we do have designated priority groups, which are Indigenous, African, Nova Scotian, Black or people of color, deaf or people who experience disability, and those located in regional areas outside of Halifax. Regional municipality is what we're talking about. And so we're looking for folks who's both support these communities and who are led by members of these communities. So what makes an organization eligible? For this program, you are required to be registered as a nonprofit with the Provincial Registry of Joint Stocks. You could be registered federally with the understanding that you are based in and operating in Nova Scotia. So again, your center of operations in Nova Scotia, you've been active for at least 4 years. You may have only become registered with Joint Stocks last year. That's okay. We're just asking if that you've been active for 4 years as a group. You have to have a mandate to create, produce, or present work by professional artists. And so as we were talking about earlier, this is really what defines this program as opposed to the cultural operating program, which is run through the department. You engage the paid expertise of arts professionals in programming and administration. You pay professional fees and artists according to industry standards, whether or not that's something like CARFAC or equity. You will conduct an annual audit, review, engagement, or independent financial review, depending on how the size of your revenues. And you will have received at least 3 project grants in the last 5 years from public arts funders. If you are someone who has been receiving operating assistance and you're like, hey, wait, I actually hadn't applied in the last few years, that's okay. Those sort of operating applications sort of count towards your project grants. So median annuals of $100,000 or greater, which I already went over. You have strategic and operational planning and evaluation processes that support your work and mandate. So where this is a program where we're committing to 4 years of funding, we want to make sure that that sort of solid foundation and planning is in place. You must secure multiple sources of revenues, such as corporate contributions, donations, sales, membership fees, and pursue other sources of public or private funding. Arts Nova Scotia can't be the sole funder. You know, we are just meant to be leveraged to allow you to get other sources of revenue. And you must comply with all of Arts Nova Scotia's policies. So you can find all of our policies on the About page on our website, and we have policies on things like cultural protocol, like cultural appropriation and Indigenous protocols. There's lots of good information there. So that is who is eligible. There are just a few things that come up every once in a while. So we just wanted to highlight ineligible organizations include private or for-profit entities, organizations who receive operating assistance from Department of Communities, Culture, Tourism, and Heritage. So if Jessica is your contact, unfortunately, you're not eligible to this program. And organizations whose primary mandate is education or training. So if you're primarily a school that maybe does some work with professional artists, that would fall outside of the eligibility criteria, and organizations that simply submit incomplete applications. So maybe after the 100,000 or the median question, the next question is, what are the funding levels? And these are maximums. They are not what is guaranteed in the program. So this is the maximum amount you can receive based on the size of your organization. I just want to make that really clear that just because you are in you know, in just say the first range, you're not guaranteed to get 25% of your annual budget in funding. these, you know, there's a lot of things that are taken into consideration in the distribution of funding. So it looks at your organization's size and scope, but also how you are, like how you compare in the evaluation, as well as, you know, whether or not organizations are part of the priority groups. So this is a little bit different if you have applied to operating assistance in the past. We are asking for a review engagement or audited statements by an independent accountant. If up to the 1 million mark. If you are an organization that has revenues of $1 million or greater, we're asking for audited statements. So audited statements are only required if your revenues are 1 million or greater. Funding is awarded on a 4-year agreement. So you will, whatever the amount that you are awarded this year, if you're successful, will be, we will have an agreement to give that amount to you for the following 3 years. In the Operate Sustain program, you will have access to 1 Arts Nova Scotia project grant, 1 professional development or development grant, and 1 commissioning grant every 3 years. So a few things about that can either be within our Grants to Organizations and Groups program or in the Artists and Communities program. So 1 big project grant, and we're really pleased to let you know that the actual maximum for grants to organizations and groups is going up. So previously you could apply for up to $15,000, but in the upcoming deadlines, you'll be able to apply for up to $20,000 in project grant funding. And there will also be a small increase for professional development and commissioning. So they're going from 5 to 5 to 7,500, so 7,500. I do see that there's a question in the chat. I've made note of it, and we'll talk about that all at the end, just because I think we can get I just want to make sure that I get through all of the information. So as Brini mentioned, CADAC, you know, is going to be what we're using. You know, we understand that there are a lot of opinions about the ease and use of CADAC, but one thing that we heard loud and clear is folks wanted more consistency between funders, and a lot of people who would be applying to this program already have CADAC filled out and with Canada Council. And so we have been I just totally lost my train of thought. Yeah, we've been talking to Canada Council about who already has CADAC and also how we can support those who don't to be onboarded onto this system. And this is really a great tool as well for research and understanding the sector in Nova Scotia. This is data that we previously hadn't had access to. So we're really excited about it, and I think it's a good thing for everyone. How often is funding awarded? So I mentioned application intake happens every 4 years. And the next question, can our funding level change? So we were committed to not disabling you as an organization, but yes, your funding can change based on the following deadline. So it can go up based on your evaluation and the size of your organization, and it can also go down. And this is something that we also heard in our consultations, is that there was really no room for growth and movement within this. So we want everyone to know that, like, it's a dynamic program and it will sort of change from year to year when you're applying. But we do have this fair notice policy where we are not going to reduce anyone's funding by more than 25% without fair notice. So fair notice would include, you know, receiving like, you know, where in evaluation you may have scored lower, and you will have a period of time to address those concerns. the key thing to remember is that we're not going to cut you by more than 25% at any given time without this fair notice and without an opportunity for you as an organization to respond to those concerns. What should our application include? We're going to go over that next. How will our application be assessed? So like all programs at Arts Nova Scotia, we use a peer assessment committee. I will say too, like this is something that came up in our assessments. We do really, came up in our like sort of conversations. We do really work hard to ensure a diversity of region, gender, age, race, and culture when inviting assessors. You know, and it can be a difficult task, especially now that the operating program's open, to find folks that you know, aren't in a conflict of interest. But we do find professional artists and arts administrators to come and evaluate these applications, and they are multidisciplinary. So that's not in this program. We don't assess according to discipline. A little bit different from project funding at Arts Nova Scotia. In project funding, what the assessors say goes, it's final. In this program, the assessors will give their recommendations to Arts Nova Scotia Board of Directors, and the Board of Directors makes the final approval of the funding. There is an assessment tool that assessors will use, and I really want you to flag this for when you're writing your application. So there's lots of questions that you're going to fill out in your application, and think about yourself like whether or not you're answering some of these evaluation criteria within your answers as well. So this really completes those questions. It's sort of, I would have this kind of to the side of your desk as well as you're writing out your written responses. So artistic impact is 40% of the evaluation. So I won't go through all of these in great detail, but things that the assessment committee will be looking for is how programming furthers artistic vision, how programming is achievable and appropriate, how program supports the development of the general art form or artistic practice, the level of exploration, originality, and risk, the integrity of the creative processes, the organization's commitment to develop and support work by Nova Scotian artists, the effectiveness of practices that eliminate cultural appropriation and support meaningful representation, and the level at which the organization shows commitment to advancing opportunities for and service to equity deserving and underrepresented communities. So in each one of these, rather than having a particular question about you know, what is your commitment to equity, diversity, inclusion? It's looked at holistically in the assessment criteria, what the commitment to equity is in each of the categories. So relevance and community impact is 30% of the evaluation. So this includes the relevance of the organization to the community it serves, how the organization provides opportunities for the public, how the organization's community engagement practice serve the artistic vision, how you develop and maintain collaborative relationships and partnerships, how the organization provides opportunities and mentorship. These two things, sort of collaborative relationships and mentorship, as sort of a key sort of indicator and area for concentration, really came up again in a lot of the conversations we had. This is what you want to see your fellow artists doing in their organizations, and the effectiveness of marketing and communication activities, the level of accessibility of your engagement, including physical, cultural, you know, financial accessibility, and the significance of steps the organization has taken to pursue equity, diversity, and inclusion, depending on the region, community served, and size and mandate. So everything is within your own organization's context. Finally, organizational effectiveness. is worth 30%. And this is where, in addition to kind of the finance CADAC forms that you have, you'll be evaluated on governance practices and policies. So, you know, how does your structure relate to your purpose, community, life cycle, and size? The strength of your organization's policies in upholding equity in its human resources, governance, and operational practices. Human resources, so the role of leadership, management, and the board in good governance and fostering inclusion. Human resources practices, making sure that you're providing fair remuneration, professional development, and equitable employment, etc. Financial management, so you know, are your budgets making sense? Are you, you know, using resources well? And how does it reflect your organization's overall financial health? And then finally, operational effectiveness. So the organization's ability to navigate change, adapt to new circumstances, and tolerate risk. So we are in the process of reviewing the concern status policy. So this is if there's a major concern raised by the committee, the concern status policy will come into play. We still have the existing concern status policy to draw upon, but I just wanted to let you know that the board is taking a look at this policy to make sure that it's updated to reflect the new operating programs. When will our funding be confirmed? This says within 8 to 12 weeks. This is a pretty large program with a large assessment. I think that you can expect to hear back from the March 15th deadline by end of May, early June. And if you don't hear, you can reach out to me and I will let you know when you can expect to hear. I don't think the deadline falls on a weekend or holiday, but just good information to know is that anytime that happens, it moves to the next business day. I'm not going to go through how do I submit my application. This is just sort of the nitty gritty of naming your files, putting them in an email, etc. The one thing that I will flag at this time is that we cannot open numbers files. They are like totally padlocked for us. There's just no possible way for us to open them. And I've tried sending it to my phone and things like that. We just can't open them. So please make sure you're and pages files as well. So please make sure that you are saving everything either as a PDF, Word doc, or Excel document. That is a huge help to us and to your assessors. Okay, so I'm going to hop on to the checklist. I will just answer those two questions that I noted. There's two questions that I noted just in case folks have to go. So if you haven't, if you've received operating assistance from CCTH in the past, but are willing to switch to this funding stream, would they be eligible? Likely no. And that's because there is a reason why you were put into CCTH unless your mandate has changed in the last few years. You are at CCTH for a particular reason, and that reason hasn't changed. And I also see that Janet Larkman has asked, will the CCTH levels be the same as Operate Sustain? I have no idea is the simple answer to that. But as Jessica mentioned, they will have more information for you moving forward. But I expect that they will be different. Okay, so I am just going to go through the checklist. Please know that you can also follow along on your own computer, because I understand that sometimes I don't know what device you're watching this on. It might be difficult to see, but I'll certainly go through it with you. at the top is a literal checklist of all of the things you need. And it's long. It's long, but it's meant to be, this is like kind of the exhaustive list that you can kind of continue to go back to. As I mentioned, the Activate application is much slimmer. So the application form, I talked about already, but I'm actually going to go through each of these headings. So just general info, and this is sort of a carryover from other applications. So the word counts that you are given are to give you a sense of the level of detail of time if you like that is expected of you. If you can reuse information from other grant applications, please do so within reason, keeping in mind that your assessors don't want to, you know, they don't have time to read an entire tome for each application. And the good news about this is we mean this quite literally, and with these, if you are already receiving funding either in the artist-driven programs or artist-driven organizations program or Artistic Catalysts at Canada Council, the questions are nearly identical. So you can reuse and update your responses. We try to align these as best as possible. And you may include all written responses in the same document. That's really easy to do. And a reminder that like some of these documents are going to come to us via email, and the application form, self-ID form, and climate change questionnaire are all fillable online forms. So the application form, if you need a preview, it's at the bottom of this page. This entire document is hyperlinked. So if I'm going through and I'm like, oh, what do I wonder if they ask, you know, what my nonprofit registration number is in the application form, I can go through, I can see that there's an entire overview of the application form, and I can go back up to the checklist at any time. So the written assessment responses, so the sort of the meat of the application, this is where I talked about really making sure that you have this how our application will be assessed in the back of your mind, on the side of your desk, when you're writing these responses. They will you know, help you kind of figure out what it is that you're meant to be talking about in each section. So there is an organizational profile. This is, you know, the mandate of your organization, artistic visions, goals, and objectives, brief history, administrative structure, and important information about the context or environment that you work in, whether or not that's the region, the cultural community, the artistic community. And this is really to help as well, understanding that there is a multidisciplinary panel, and that context can be really, really helpful for others. So then we're going to ask for reporting. So even though this is the first iteration of this, we're still asking you to report on what you've done previously. So we're looking for a high-level summary of the last year, like your last completed year. So in identifying highlights, challenges, and knowledge gained. Asking how did this relate to your artistic vision? How did it support the development of your art form? How did it support Nova Scotian artists? Describe highlights of your community engagement, thinking about all of those questions we asked and we're asking in the assessment tool. So maybe providing examples about public outreach, professional development, partnerships, marketing, communication. And these the questions mostly correspond really directly to those criteria. So artistic impact describes some highlights of your planned artistic programming for the next years. So you're going to really be talking about what you're doing over the next year and the year 2, 3, and 4, understanding that you're going to have way less confirmed for the following years in the funding cycle, but we just want a sense that, like, you know, you're planning ahead. Maybe you have like a particular cycle that you go through in how your organization works, and we just want a little bit of insight to that. So we understand that you'll have a lot of detail for programming that's happening in the next year, the next 2 years, and then that will kind of become a little less detailed as you go on. Keeping in mind here, like this is not a spot where you need to list point form, you know, every single thing that you have planned. That's why we have the programming overview template. So this is why we're really asking for highlights. Then next is relevance and community impact. So same idea, understanding that the information for the next year is going to be a lot more complete. So describe highlights of planned community and audience engagement. So organizational effectiveness, we're asking you to describe your administrative structure and how it supports your organization's activities, your organization's governance model and planning processes. Do you have a regular strategic planning process that you go through, for example? The professional working conditions for those involved. Do you pay fees to artists? You know, how are safe working conditions? We do ask as well that everyone have a respectful workplace policy in place. And that's one of the policies at Arts Nova Scotia that you can look at. And key partnerships. Then you have a moment to talk about your organization's financial health, planning, and priorities. So this is new in this program. So if your organization has an accumulated deficit of this isn't new, but if you have a accumulated deficit greater than 10% of your revenues, you must include a separate debt reduction plan. So we need to see that you're aware of the debt and that you have a plan in place to address it. On the flip side, if your organization has an unrestricted accumulated surplus greater than 20% of your revenues, you must include a separate plan for the use of those funds. So we want to make sure that any kind of large surpluses are addressed. The next question is aims and objectives. Identify 3 or 4 of the most important aims or objectives your organization hopes to achieve in the next funding cycle. They should be specific and achievable. Explain how they relate to your mission, artistic vision, and context. Finally, there's additional comments. What didn't we ask? What are you burning to say? What do you need the assessment committee to know? You have 500 words to talk about that. We're asking for a list of staff members and their positions, indicating whether or not they are part-time, full-time, permanent, or contract. We're asking for an up-to-date list of board members as of March 1st, 2024, and indicating their roles. Support material and annotations. So support material should be included in your application within like not a ton. So you can see here what the examples are. You know, it isn't being used in the same way as it is in a project fund, like in a project application, but this is to make sure assessors have a sense of what you do, how you do it, like that you do it well, etc. So you have some different ways to present that, either in audio, video, still images, or your website and social media you can also include. So maybe you have like an Instagram that's full of all of the outreach activities that you do. You can put that in there as well. And we also encourage everyone applying to Arts Nova Scotia to annotate their support material list. So you can click here. I'm not going to, but we have an example of what those annotations might look like. And that can be really helpful. Number one, you should be crediting any artists that are in the support material, but also, you know, sometimes it's a still image and we're not really sure what it is that we're looking at. Are we looking at just say like set design, things like that, lighting? It's important to kind of know what we're looking for because there's a lot of support material to go through. So supplementary documents are totally optional, but this is, you know, sometimes folks, if you're a new organization, like to include, you know, letters of support or testimonials. If you have a strategic plan, you can include it here. Maybe you have like a policy about how you do your programming that you'd like to highlight. You can also include that there. These are totally optional to include, but we wanted to give you the option to to include them. The programming overview template, I'm not going to go through in great detail, but basically it's asking in the same way we asked for your financial information. So what did you do in the last fiscal year that you completed? What have you been doing this year and what will you do? And then in the first year of funding, what is it that, in the first, second, third, and fourth year funding, what you intend to do, totally understanding that it's going to taper off as the years go on, but you will have an opportunity to update these, of course. We've talked about financial and statistical reporting. We are asking for your signed financial statements. So this is where we will see either the review engagement or audit. If you're between $100 and $1 million and $100,000 and $1 million in revenue, or if you're an organization greater than 1 million, this is where your audited statements will be included. So that is the bulk of the application. That's where you can go back and find everything. This is what I look to when you have a question. So I figured that would be the best way to go through it with you. I do see that we have a question right away. So Brittany, I can start. I did just want to ask Brittany, is there anything that I missed?
No, I don't think so.
Great, thanks. Tessa Mendel, I see that your hand is up.
Oh, hi. Thank you very much for all that information, and it sounds fantastic, the work you've all done. I have some questions about the financial reporting. The first is that we do, if we use CADC, but in my opinion, it's very difficult to understand comprehensively, and we might prefer to use your financial template because it has it so clearly laid out from last year, current year, projected year. Are we allowed to use your financial template if we prefer to? And my second question is about the review engagement or whatever, or audit. At the top of the grant, it seemed to say you could have it just signed by an outside professional accountant, but then in the body of the email it said a review engagement, and I'm concerned that if we haven't had a review engagement, whether we will definitely be able to get something done by the grant application deadline, just because I'm finding people very, very busy. So those are my two questions. Thank you.
Yeah, as long as it's coming from an outside accountant, so even like if it says like notice to reader, that type of thing, we're just looking for something that's not your internally created budget.
Perfect. So we can do a notice to reader. And
Yes.
And then what about the question about can we use your financial template rather than CADC if we choose?
Yeah, so we're not requiring folks to use CADC this year. I mean, if you already have, like, what we were kind of thinking is that you already had the information in CADC. So I think that should be okay for this year if you want to go with the financial template. I will mention that the financial template is already based on CADC. It's the same coding and everything. We have been using that for a few years. But for this year, yeah, we won't hold you to it. But I did want to stress as well is that we have been talking to the folks at Canada Council and CADC, and they will be providing some development and some training on CADC that will be available to our organizations. All right, I see some questions in the chat. So I see a question from Kelly Lee. We are working on our application and have a question regarding programming overview. Under type of activity, are you looking for genre discipline or are you looking for presentation versus outreach event? We are looking for whether or not it's a presentation or outreach event. You don't have to define the discipline. And you can always clarify in the notes section or create your own I think that there's a notes section. If there isn't, you can always create your own tab or your own column. Sally has asked, can you give us some details on how current operating grant recipients' current levels will be considered in this new model? Are we at risk of having our operating grant applications rejected entirely? That's a great question. I don't think anyone would be at risk of having their operating applications rejected. I think that the evaluation is going to be really key here. And again, like I would say, we're going to hold to that fair notice policy that we've put in place. So if you have been receiving an amount, we're not going to no one should receive less than 75% of the amount that they have previously received. Would you concur, Brainy?
Yeah,
Okay,
I would.
great.
Sorry, thank you. Yeah.
I do see that Melanie has asked, would you recommend applying for sustain and grants to organizations and groups in case the sustain grant is not successful? And would you accept audited statements from your parent organization, such as the university?
I replied to Melanie separately in that one,
Yeah.
just to.
I just wanted to say applying to the two programs, absolutely, if you have the capacity, please do. It can't hurt to apply to both. And yes, as Brainy mentioned, if you like, it's probably great that we have a side conversation. But if the audited statements are good enough for Canada Council, they're probably good enough for us. So if anyone else has that question. Okay, another question from Sally. Can you give us any details on what you expect for competition pools for each stream of funding? For example, do you expect that a large amount of Group 1 organizations will be applying for the sustain stream? So in case anyone's unfamiliar, Sally has asked about Group 1 organizations. So in the previous iteration of this program, there were tiers based on the size of the organization. One thing I will say is that for the most part, like the vast majority of organizations that were already receiving funding in the operating assistance program would be eligible to apply to sustain, but they are not required to. And so we really just want to make that clear as well. So in terms of competition, like yeah, I would expect it's pretty much on par. I don't think that there's we also have a doubling of funding from the last time. So I think I hope that answers your question. And another question from Sally, do we have any info on what the interim year reporting requirements will be? Really, for the most part, I think it will be just giving like a one-pager on whatever your last year, like what you did in the last year, and updating your financials to include projections for the next fiscal year and updating your financials with the completed year. So
Yeah,
it should be.
And reporting any major changes, I think.
Yeah. And you're very welcome. Any other questions? Well, I'm just going to consider the presentation a great success. There's no questions. But I know that they're out there, so I'll just wait.
Yeah.
I'm glad that it's been helpful for folks. Really, if you don't have a question right now and your question comes, at 3 a.m., you can send me an email then, I won't answer it, but I really will answer any any inquiries you have. Jesse has asked, grants to organizations, commission and PD grants, is that one of each every 3 years? Yes, so within a 3-year period, you can receive a commission, a professional development, and a project grant. And is the requested percentage based on the median of 4 years from Heather? Yes, it is. Will we require CADX statistic columns to be updated annually for ANS? If you are updating them annually for Canada Council, then we'll just take what you've updated with them, but we won't ask above and beyond anything you would do for Canada Council. We'll wait another few minutes just in case there's still some people kind of popping on. So if there are any questions, we're here.
Hi, Lauren. It's Heather. I have a question. I can't figure out how to put my hand up.
Great, I can see you glowing, so that's enough.
Okay, thanks. I'm just trying to understand Melanie's question about whether you would apply to for the sustain program and grants to organizations and groups. So does that mean it's possible to apply under the old operating program? Or is that just for project grants?
No, organizations and groups is just the project grant program.
Okay, great. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Hi, sorry, that's Sally here.
Hi, Sally.
One more question, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Yeah, I wanted to ask, for your definition of professional artists,
Mhm.
will that also include organizations whose mandate is primarily supporting emerging artists?
I mean, emerging artists under our definition are still professional artists. They're just in the emerging stages of their career. Where we would differentiate would be pre-emerging artists. So artists who are like still in their training or school, who like haven't completed that yet.
Okay, beautiful. Thank you so much.
All right, well, I think maybe we'll stay here till 2:05, unless the questions come rolling in. And if you have to go, that's okay with us. Okay, there is a question. Can you apply for Project Professional Development Commission each year, but can only get one? So you can apply for each of those categories and receive each of those categories in 1 year, but it would be another 2 years before you could apply again.
But if you didn't receive the grant, obviously
Yeah.
you could apply again.
You could reapply.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone. Alex missed the answer to Elsa's question. What we were saying is, if you're eligible for one in each category every 3 years, you could apply and receive all 3 of those within 1 year, and then you'd have to wait 2 years before reapplying, but it doesn't mean about you can apply as many times as it takes you to get the grant. So there's no limit on applications, just on the amount of grants you receive. All right, so we'll wrap it up there. So thanks everyone for coming out, and we'll talk to you soon about your applications.
Thanks, everyone.